I'm at this, speed dating thing, but for friendships. I know it sounds a little weird, but I'm just trying to find somebody to hang out with, and I'm willing to do anything at this point. So I actually think it's about to start. So I'll call you back when it's over.
Hey, man.
Hey, nice to meet you. I'm James.
Johnny.
Wow, the J names.
There you go.
That's a good start. Something in common. Johnny, tell me a little about yourself.
Okay. Recently, I've been really into my health, looking into
Fair.
what foods to eat, what I should avoid, all those kind of things. Body's like a machine, gotta fuel it up.
Hi!
Hi, it's nice to meet you. I'm James.
Hi, James. I'm Debbie. Should I look here or should I look here?
For what?
Uh,
Okay.
I just saw on Twitter yesterday that red meat is essentially the #1 cause of death in this country, so you're gonna wanna avoid that at all costs.
I didn't know that. I appreciate you letting me know. We can try maybe, there's this place on the road where you can basically build your own salad. We could go there.
well, I love the theater! What about yourself?
That was great. Hi, it's so nice to meet you. I'm James. Okay. Never equated eating vegetables to cigarettes,
I know
so
most people don't, but there
learn
we go.
something new every day, I guess. So at this point, I don't really know, what do you eat?
Yeah, well, hey man, you come by later, I'll boil up some fresh acorns and mushrooms that I foraged this morning, all right?
Sounds.
Hey, and I'll tell you about tap water, don't drink that.
I actually love movies, so pretty much the same thing.
With no singing?
Yeah, like good writing in a story, but less singing, the better.
Conversation's overrated, might as well live life sedated. Why not sing everything?
Do you enjoy reading? Sports?
Can I call you Little J?
Sure, the Bull. You
Yeah.
can call me whatever
well,
you
my
would
mom
like.
calls me William, but all my friends call me the Bull. You call me the Bull.
Are you a foodie? NASCAR?
Let me show you something right here. You see this?
Tell me, what are you into? You know what you signed up for, right? Like, this is a conversational, okay.
This is a South District lacrosse championship ring. Runner-up.
Right now, I'm really into tattoos, though.
Okay, so I see you've got a start on that.
Yeah, I have a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you lax, bro? Do you even lax?
Janice, I'll be honest with you, I've always wanted a tattoo, but I've been a little afraid, so this might be the push I need to just,
Yeah.
so you know what? Let's do it. Tell me what you're thinking.
I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Bring it in here, man. Bring it in. All right, bro.
Well, I'm gonna get my eyeballs tattooed and maybe my tongue.
Where's that bell?
Let's just get this over with, man.
Yeah, you don't have to tell me twice. Hi, I'm James.
Mark,
Yeah.
it's been a day.
It has been a day. Someone just asked if they could tattoo my eyeballs.
Wow.
Yeah.
I thought I had met some weird people.
Yeah.
But
Hey, okay,
That's-
you know what, man? Don't worry about it. Let's just tell me a little bit about yourself.
I mean, I'm just looking for a friend. I like to go to church. I like sports. Just looking for somebody to hang out with. That's all.
You like sports?
Sports.
You into football?
Yeah. You got a football team?
The Chargers, man.
Yeah. Could you imagine how awkward that would be? If you went through a speed dating thing for friends? If it was the only way to make friends, it would be terrible. Just sitting across the table from a complete stranger who may or may not look like somebody you would be friends with, probably not. But since you would rather not just stare into their eyes silently like that one girl did, you gotta ask them what they're into. Oh, man. After some stiff and probably clunky small talk, you might actually stumble upon something you have in common. And if that were to happen, you would force yourself to spend the next few minutes only talking about that thing, because heaven forbid that you find another shared interest, right? But then the conversation continues and you do find another shared interest. You organically flow into several more mutual things, and before you know it, you actually kind of enjoy this conversation. Weird. And all this combined would lead you to actually being a little sad that the conversation had to end because you kind of like this person. That would be awkward. Except that's how it usually happens with friendships. Now, it may or may not be speed dating, probably not speed dating event, but if you think back on how you became friends with your friends, it more or less happened that way, didn't it? You struck up a conversation or joined one in progress, and before you knew it, you and some others were laughing and having a good time talking about some of that surface level stuff. And after a few hours, you left wanting to catch up again with this person or group. Then boom, friends, right? It's also organic. It just kind of happens. You don't have to try very hard at this. Making friends really isn't that difficult when you think about it. Most of us would probably say we have at least a few, and yet, more than ever, people feel alone and disconnected. Despite how mechanically easy it is to connect with other people via social media, text, phone calls, all that stuff, most people feel more disconnected than ever. In fact, according to a study done in 2021 by the Harvard Graduate School of Education, 36% of Americans, which includes 51% of young mothers and a staggering 61% of young adults, say that they regularly feel, quote, serious loneliness. You know, if that's not you, you might think, well, it's not really a big deal, right? It's a huge deal. It's a huge problem that goes beyond simply being mopey or alone. According to Julianne Holt, a psychology professor at Brigham Young University, she says, quote, insufficient social connection is a bigger risk factor for premature death than obesity, and it's the equivalent of smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. That's crazy. Now, I don't want to scare anybody or give you a research paper. I'm simply pointing out loneliness is a big deal. And studies show that a crazy amount of us struggles with it regularly. But that's where we find some good news, right? We know how to fix loneliness. The solution to serious loneliness, it's not a secret. We've kind of already talked about it. It's just that too few of us participate in it. And it's called friendship. Actually, that's not quite right. Can we fix this? Real friendship. Like I said before, most of us would say we have friends, and I don't just mean online. Like most of us have at least a couple people who we see from time to time who we would consider a friend. But having friends is not the same as having real friends. See, friends, they know the things you like, but real friends know who you are. Friends see glimpses of your life through a filter that you choose to give them. Real friends see you as you really are. Friends only talk about the easy stuff that ultimately doesn't matter. Real friends talk about that too, but they also talk about the hard stuff that challenges you and makes you better. And that is to say, there's a better way to have friends. They're called real friends. And it's the kind of friendship God had in mind at the very beginning. Before we really even get into it, I want to make sure you hear this. It's not overselling it to say that our ever-deepening relationship with Jesus Christ critically depends on our intentional investment into real friendships. It does. And so I want to show you that today by highlighting a few famous friends in the Bible. And we're going to explore how they were real friends to each other. And then I want to give us some practical steps to actually finding real friends of our own. And to that end, would you take a second and pray with me wherever you are right now? God, thank you for today. Thank you for the opportunity to just be here, to have breath in our lungs, and to have the capacity to hear your voice, God. Would you speak to us what you want us to hear in this moment and beyond, God, as we learn what it takes to be real friends, friends the way you designed it, God. We thank you and we love you. Amen. All right, and if you come to our church for any length of time, chances are good that you've heard of the Apostle Paul. If you haven't, though, that's okay, because you're about to. Without giving every detail, let's just say Paul is the man, right? Like, this dude is one of the most influential people in our faith who did an immeasurable amount of good. He planted several of the earliest churches. He met people where they were and spoke to them in a way that made them feel loved and cared for. And his work and his legacy continues to guide and inspire us to this day, millions of us around the world. But Paul wasn't always this way. Paul, who once went by the name Saul, was kind of the opposite of all that for a good portion of his early life. He actively fought against Jesus' mission as a young adult, and in some cases, he imprisoned or killed people who openly followed Jesus. Acts chapter 8 says it this way: on that day, a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. Those are like neighboring towns from where they were. godly men buried Stephen and mourned deeply for him. Stephen was a martyr who Saul actually approved the stoning of. This guy had just died. That's what started all this. But Saul began to destroy the church. Going from house to house, he dragged off both men and women and put them in prison. He made this his mission, and we don't know just how long he did this, but eventually he had a life-changing encounter with Jesus that made him do a complete 180. And after that encounter, he began actually building the church and helping the people he once hurt. As you can imagine, though, his past actions had already done plenty of damage to his reputation. Like, the people he was trying to call friends now, they were not sold on his transformation. I mean, I don't know. It'd be like if Bernie Madoff approached you and was like, hey, let me invest your money for you. I swear I'm not going to steal it this time. I'm different now. You know what I mean? Sam Bankman-Fried, this guy from crypto, says the same thing. Getting back into crypto, y'all. Not going to spend it all in the Bahamas. Trust me, bro. He would say that probably. Like, you're not going to trust these people, all right? They've done the damage. Saul had killed Christians, and now he wants to be one of them. The skepticism was earned. However, it was also true that Saul really had changed. Like, he was totally different than he was before. He was called by Jesus himself to do his work in the world, and he actually wanted to do it. So for a time, he must have felt stuck, right? Since his words weren't going to do much in the way of changing the minds of the believers, Saul really needed an ally. He needed someone who was already trusted to vouch for him, to forgive him for his past, and to stick by his side. He needed a teacher. He needed a mentor. He needed that ally. And he found all of that in a guy named Barnabas. See, when Saul came to Jerusalem, he tried to join the disciples, but they were all afraid of him, not believing that he really was a disciple, as we discussed. But Barnabas took him and brought him to the apostles. He told them how Saul on his journey had seen the Lord and that the Lord had spoken to him, and how in Damascus he had preached fearlessly in the name of Jesus. See, Barnabas was a respected, humble, and key part of the early church who had seen the change in Saul for himself. See, before he brings Saul in front of the apostles, Barnabas had watched Saul preach Jesus' name, and he grew to know him. Then he forgave him for his past, and he would eventually go on to take Saul, who eventually became Paul, under his wing and teach him to do what is good and right. And that's one of the things real friends do for each other. They encourage each other to do what is good and right and forgive when they get it wrong. This is what Barnabas did for Paul, and it freed Paul. It changed the minds of the believers to the point where, and this is really, really cool and ironic, they began putting themselves on the line for Paul, these believers. He, being Paul debated with some of the Greek-speaking Jews, but they tried to murder him. When the believers heard about this, they took him down to Caesarea and sent him away to Tarsus, his hometown. The people he once tried to kill saved his life from the people who were once his allies. And they cleared the way for him to unlock his maximum potential for the rest of his life. Barnabas was a real friend to Paul when hardly anyone else was, and Paul was kind of not on anybody's side, or at least it felt like it. And that belief, in no small part, helped change the world. Remember, real friends encourage me to do what is good and right and forgive me when I get it wrong. All of us have made mistakes we're ashamed of. And it's the guilt from those mistakes that sometimes holds us back from being authentic with ourselves and with other people. I think it's safe to say that every one of us wants to be able to move on from something we regret. I mean, that's more or less the definition of regret, right? But far too few of us have people in our lives who are in the position to forgive us or help us to forgive ourselves. And like Paul, we're always going to be held back from our potential unless we have real friends who can speak into it. But it doesn't stop there, right? I mean, we're human after all. And we're going to be tempted to repeat behavior we know isn't good for us. So we've got to be reminded, constantly encouraged of the right way to live and the good things God would have us do often. Real friends are consistently there, pointing us in the right direction, giving us wise counsel, and encouraging us along the way. In fact, this is where the hyper-connectedness of our culture can actually be a major asset that they didn't have back then, right? Anytime we talk about social media or being connected to one another all the time, we usually talk about it negatively, I think, but it really is so easy to like shoot a text, make a phone call, send a message, whatever it is, to check in on people and encourage one another. And if we'll do this with our real friends often, we'll have significantly less chance of feeling lonely or disconnected because we're going to feel cared for, seen, and loved. In fact, this happened to me 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I reached out to a couple of friends of mine and confided in them something I've been struggling with lately, right? And I didn't go to them for advice, really. I just needed someone to hear me, who I knew would encourage me and help make sure I was moving in the right direction toward what God had for me. And all it took, I sent like a 6-minute video message or something like that. We have this app that we use. Anyway, so fast. And almost immediately, both of them were messaging me back, building me up, helping me to see what I needed to see. And they did actually offer some advice that I hadn't asked for, by the way. And normally, if I don't ask for advice, I typically don't want it. It's no offense. It just is what it is. I think you probably feel the same way. But they know me. They love me. And so their advice was welcome. They were encouraging me to do what was right and good for myself and for my family. And as a result, I've made plans. I've already implemented their ideas into my life, which is making a difference. See, their willingness to love me and guide me, it frees me from what could become a burden if I was going to go at it alone. And exactly the same thing would happen if the roles were reversed. It has happened. We each have each other at the drop of a hat available all the time because we've invested and prioritized real friendship for many years now. And I'm going to talk about that development over the years a little later, but if I may take a quick aside real quick, notice I didn't go on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook to ask the opinions of everybody on there about my situation, right? As we all know, we can be honest. I mean, let's be honest. There are no shortage of opinions or pieces of advice on the internet. And we can also be honest about this too. I hope none of you take offense to this because some of you are friends with me on Facebook, so you might feel awkward about this, but almost 100% of that advice is just not helpful. It's just not. And that's not to say that everyone that I'm friends with on Facebook or that you're friends with on Facebook isn't smart or is unable to give good advice. It's because we don't know each other well enough, right? We haven't made the investment in one another yet, and that's okay. Not everyone can be real friends, and they shouldn't be. But I went straight privately to the people who know me best. And because of that investment, because of the time spent together, their encouragement and advice, it was spot on. It's what I needed. Anyway, another way real friends can behave, or should behave, can be found in a different famous friendship from the Bible, King David and the prophet Nathan. David, like Paul, is a critical part of our history. He's often called a man after God's own heart because of how passionately he tried to follow God's will for his life. And for the most part, David did a remarkable job, especially considering how powerful and wealthy he was. But even still, like anybody, he wasn't perfect. And famously, David committed adultery with a woman named Bathsheba. And it gets worse. Her husband was killed by David's order after David learned that he had got Bathsheba pregnant. Yikes. That, in case it's unclear, is not a choice God wanted David to make. But for whatever reason, David was unable to see just how egregious this sin or sins were. And I mean, it feels like it's hard to see when you read it on a page, but I guess as somebody who's been there before, trapped in sin for a long time, the idea of getting lost in it and not being able to really see the repercussions it's having on your life and the people around you, it actually does make a little sense to me how that could happen, even if it doesn't excuse the behavior. But that's a subject for a different day. Without a real friend, it's unlikely anyone would have actually said anything to David because of his title and reputation, right? I mean, to approach a king in any era and point out their sins would at least come with some sort of detention, but it likely would have been a lot worse than that. Fortunately for David, he did have a real friend who did not let him off the hook, the prophet Nathan. David and Nathan had been building a deep friendship for many years before David's sins. David trusted him, and because God was using him, Nathan was able to speak plainly and honestly to David at any time. Nathan, we see in Scripture, Nathan often advised David on big issues, and David, from what we read, pretty much always listened to him. So, when David was unable to see his own failure for what it was, God used Nathan to open his eyes. There's a whole story about this, you should read it, but essentially, Nathan confronts David, and he tells him a story about a rich man who stole and killed a poor man's only lamb. And this makes David furious. I mean, because David really is a good guy. He's got a good heart. So it makes him furious. And David suggests that the rich man who would do such a thing deserves death. To which Nathan famously replies, "That was you, dog." Oh, no, wait. "You are that man." That's what he said. Yeah. Says, "That was you. I'm talking about you." Now, keep in mind, these are fighting words, okay? An accusation like this against the king of a powerful nation, like they were at the time, could easily have gotten Nathan killed, right? Again, these are strong words. And still, after this, Nathan continues, and he lays out the consequences of David's actions. But it wasn't dangerous for Nathan because of the relationship they had built. David takes this to heart, and he finally realizes, I have sinned against the Lord. Because of Nathan's willingness to speak out, David is able to fully appreciate the gravity of his sins, and he does everything he can to make it right after this. God recognizes his remorse, and he forgives him. And the consequences don't magically vanish. They're still there. David lives with those. But David is able to pick himself up and move on, living the rest of his life in pursuit of God again. And that's the second thing real friends do for each other. They don't let me off the hook and always point me back toward God. And this, more than anything else, right here, is where most of our friendships lack. Being called out by somebody rarely feels good. But when that person is someone you trust, who knows you, who cares deeply for you, and is always looking out for what God has for you, has been there in the best moments of your life to celebrate with you, then you can be confident that when they don't let you off the hook, they're doing it because they love you for your good. Now keep in mind, real friends aren't constantly looking for ways to call you out like it's their number one priority. What I mean is real friends are always willing to do so when it's needed because they love you. And they always address these things in private first. Real friends don't share your stuff online or in secret text with other people. Like, you can't really call people who do that friends. You know that. Real friends only ever do this in a compassionate way, one-on-one. It still might not feel the best. It won't feel the best. I'll just say that. Getting a mirror put in front of our failures, it's not fun. But seeing them for what they really are, combined with the constant reorienting back toward God, that's the kind of stuff that's going to shape you into the best version of yourself, the one God made you to be. Now, these two things we talked about, certainly not the whole list of what a real friend does. I've made a follow-up video where I talk about one more vital part of what it means to be a real friend. Talk about Ruth and Naomi. It's very cool, well, I think. I guess you can be the judge. I encourage you to check that out right after you're done here. But I want to make sure we spend a little bit of time talking about how to make real friends. Because as we've already established, making friends isn't too difficult. But upgrading them from friends to real friends isn't something everyone has figured out yet. What's great, though, is that's not really that difficult either. It just takes more effort. And that leads nicely into the first thing that's required in order to make real friends. You must be intentional about it. You've got to be intentional about it. Surface level friendships, as we said, almost always happen randomly. You strike up a conversation with somebody you don't know, find some common ground, make sure you like their personality, and there you go. If those things happen, you'll almost always make a friend out of this person. But if that's where it ends, that's where it ends. That's where it's always going to stay. You'll only catch up when it's convenient or necessary, and it's not going to go anywhere. It might be fun, sure, but it won't be meaningful. And that's where intentionality comes in. And if you don't feel like you have any real friends, start with the people you have now, your friends now, and shoot them a text. Ask them how they're doing, just out of the blue. Ask them how you might be able to pray for them today. Share a cool story from your day with them. Be intentional about going even a little bit deeper than just sending a meme you thought was funny. Although you should do that too, because it is funny. But if you do that other stuff on a regular basis and begin to establish a routine of checking in with one another, eventually a new layer of your friendship is going to open up. And when that happens, you got to be vulnerable. Now, I know this is scary for some of us, but you need to hear this. Real friendship cannot exist without vulnerability, period. If you're willing to dip your toe into that water first, your friend will likely follow along quicker than you think. Now, I think most of us want to be vulnerable with other people, or maybe it's better to say, most of us want to have the courage to be vulnerable. We want to be people who want to be vulnerable, but that initial prospect, it's scary. But I think the good news is you don't have to full commit right away with vulnerability. You don't have to go straight to the deep stuff, right? Ask them for advice on something you've been thinking about that's maybe not so deep. A potential career move or a hobby you're getting into, or maybe a discrepancy you are having at work, not gossiping, just something that's going on. Things that aren't usually heavier topics. They're still going to communicate to your friend that you trust them with stuff, right? Ask them for their advice on it. And as time goes on and you build rapport with one another, be intentional to increase the vulnerability. You do have to do that at some point. Ask about the serious stuff then. Vent your legitimate frustrations. Open the door more and more into the person you really are. Open yourself to that. And in all likelihood, your friend has been wanting to be vulnerable with somebody else too. And so they're going to reciprocate. And over time, your friendship's going to grow into a real one. Now, that's probably going to take a while, and it should. Real friends are built on strong foundations, and those they take time to build. But there's one more step to take before a real friendship can be completely established. I mean, eventually, you got to be willing. Be willing to what? Be willing to have the hard conversation when needed. Be willing to put everything out in the open with your friends. You have to literally ask their permission to speak into their lives anytime you sense that they need it, whether they tell you about it or not. And this is really key, you have to give them that same permission for you. When you've done that, when you've done all that together and you've given permission to each other, you've asked them to speak into your life when you need it, that's when your lives are going to be truly an open door to each other, fully committed to helping one another, be the people God called you to be. When we're intentional, vulnerable, and willing to do the things that real friends do for each other, God can use us to set one another free. Like Paul, we'll be able to come out of hiding and find a place among people who love us and care for us. And like David, we'll have our eyes open to where we can be better and stay fixated on God. With real friends, we can be free from the past that holds us down, free from the fear of the future, free from isolation, and free from that loneliness. I feel incredibly blessed and fortunate that I have this in my life. But I want to be super clear about this. It was not an accident. I worked for it. I endured many hard conversations about stuff I was doing that needed correcting. I stepped into the uncomfortable situation of having that conversation with other people. not knowing if our friendship was even going to survive the conversation. But it had to be said. If I was truly going to be a friend and truly point them back toward God, it needed to be said. So I said it. I worked for it. We worked for it. And the good news is whoever, anyone who's willing to put in the work, you can have it too. I mean, I certainly didn't corner the market on real friendship. I didn't make it up. In fact, I see it play out around me all the time, particularly here at PCC. So I thought it would actually be helpful if you didn't just hear it from me, but from a couple other people too. Now, you might recognize these two people you're about to see. And if you do, then it should come as no surprise to you that we never actually had time to ask them a question about friendship. We just hit the record button and they did not stop talking. But I guess that's a quality a lot of real friends share. Anyway, check it out.
We're ready.
You need to clap?
You clap.
I was going to clap. Stop it.
How many claps do you need there, bro?
We're overachievers.
Oh.
Supposed to be doing a conversation with Brian about being friends, but he left.
We need to make sure that we give Josh no more than 2 hours worth of video.
Right, Ted.
So, Brian is my friend, and I'm really pleased to admit
Is that how you're going to begin?
Yes, Brian, you are my friend. And you're always telling these jokes, and like maybe 1 of 10 lands. And I know you think you're funny.
First of all, you're really bad at math. And second of all, you're really bad at humor.
No,
so how would you know?
People laugh at my jokes, and I don't have to be intentional.
They're being polite. Have you ever had somebody walk in the room and throw you this idea? They're super excited about it, and you have no idea what they just said. Like none. Like you're not even sure they're on planet Earth.
Wouldn't that be an awesome person to be around all the time and be friends with? Yes. That is the right answer.
How did we become friends?
We became friends, I showed up at your church. And I remember sending you an email kind of introducing myself. I'm here, I had 5 kids, I'm newly separated, on my way to a divorce, I'm a mess. And by the way, do you know that the slides that you're using every week, no one knows how to spell the word excerpt? Because you guys were writing excerpt on scripture slides. I'm like, how? I just gently pointed that out, which
became a lifetime of gentle pointing things out.
You know,
I think what I saw in you was this deep sense of brokenness, but really an unresolved question. I think the question you were trying to figure out is, because of what has happened, because of some things that you had done, am I worthy? Do I have any value to God? And can I make any kind of contribution? You really weren't asking to get involved. And I think in that period of time, there were several critical components of us taking steps to earn some trust. And I remember the very first one was when you called me and said, you're about to make a major mistake here at the church, which had to be risky for you.
And that was I didn't work here.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think we've always had that kind of truth telling. And I remember the times that when we did start working together, I would sometimes get triggered by something.
That's
not
true.
to borrow a word, but I get upset about something, and you would just meet me head on. You remember?
I remember.
In the offices early on, I was really upset about something, and you said something to me that no one had ever said in my life ever. You looked at me and said, "You're being irrational."
Well, we were standing on the steps.
Yep.
We were outside standing on the steps, and I said, "You know you're not being rational, right?"
This is also a hallmark of our relationship. I remember things, and you remember them correctly.
Well, I mean,
It happens a lot, but that's right. I wasn't being rational, and you were willing to just tell me that.
It's not an accident that we have trust with each other. I mean, that's something we've built over time. And one of the critical moments in my ministry, and I think for our friendship, sort of intersected with this moment backstage one time when I had, I'm good with words, and sometimes I've leaned on some ability there and cheated on preparation. And you said we were back. I'll never forget this. And you just said, you're not honoring your gift. You know you're not honoring your gift, which is to say, you could do this better, but you're not.
And it's not like I walk around looking for ways to be bossy and tell you things about your life, though I do that sometimes. But I think an important part of our friendship is that we've both been willing to make ourselves vulnerable to that. You have talked a lot at church about the season of depression that you were in. And I'll never, ever, ever forget. Susan had to be out of town, and she was worried about you. You were not well.
I was not okay.
You were not okay at all. And Susan called me and asked if Tony and I would go over and check on you. And then us walking over to the house and seeing you, for me, certainly the lowest I'd ever seen you ever, realizing you're not okay, but knowing that we'd been invited to be in that space with you, and we couldn't fix it, but we were just there. We just showed up. That's an honor to me, to be invited into those vulnerable places like that. This has really become incredibly important in my life. What would you say if somebody wanted a friend like this?
Well, I would say, most people think that it just happens. Some people get lucky, and some people aren't. But it's really about being intentional. You have to seek it out. You have to say, this is something that my life is not complete without friends like this. Some of it's trial and error, right? So we test the ground, and maybe we find out, this isn't exactly what I was looking for. Because you have to have some common ground. You have, particularly value-based. You have to have some common values for that to happen. We knew we had that, and then we took some steps of vulnerability to determine, can I trust this person? And I think if somebody's willing to do those things, what would you say?
I think you alluded to it, but I think the most important thing for me is look where your values are and find somebody that you can say, that person aligns, they believe in what I believe in, they believe this has great value for them. Because once you're on that same trajectory and you kind of have the same sort of purpose in mind, there's a commonality there then allows you to build some trust.
At the end of the day, no matter what, I know you're going to always point me towards God. Whether I'm thinking right or I'm thinking not right or whatever's going on with me, you're always going to point me towards God and advise me to take action that would reflect well on God. And that's true for you too. And for me, I think there are a lot of valuable components to our friendship, but for me, that's the most valuable piece.
I would agree.
You can not only hear about their friendship in their words, but you can also see it in their interactions, can't you? Now, as they said and Elijah said, we can have friends like that too, but it doesn't just happen. We have to be intentional and vulnerable and willing. And real friends point each other toward Jesus. Now, if you're looking for a better way to live this year, then step out and take the risk to build a real friendship. And a small group is a great place to start. So look for the small group sign up on the website. Find a group where you just might find a friend. Thanks for being here today, and we'll see you next week for the finale of our Better Way series.
I could just